got to call into the 120th Precinct in New York City. And I'll tell you what, it felt good to hear the voices over there in New York City. I had seen the video with Donald and everything, but I hadn't heard their voices individually in a really long time. NYC.gov. Yeah, they answered right away, and they were right there in New York. My perspective's always been outside of New York, but then being outside of New York, sometimes you forget about all the individual people in New York City. Because all the videos are sort of like this group that you see a lot of see the sheer size of the force of people, but when it comes to actually talking to individuals, kind of like I talk to individuals in my city or any other city, it's rare to find on it's rare to find on the internet, but also in person for me. I hadn't talked to anybody from New York. So I thought that was really cool. I called in, I got to talk to a sergeant. She identified herself as Sargent something. So she was powerful. The lady I was talking to, I knew from the get-go when she identified herself as Sargent yada yada. I can't remember her exact name. You'd have to watch the video over again to get her exact name, because I was getting the video out of it. But hey, they're getting details. They're getting all the details. So I'm learning a lot. Like even just the name to write down and all that is a key detail that you need in policing. It would have been nice for me to write that down, but it's in the video. I do the videos where it gets that, where police, they do videos and they write things down. They have a whole community council, the president's Josephine Marino. They have all these names that aren't very popular in my area. They're in New York City. That's where you live if you had these certain names. Look at this, Joseph Castellano of the Castellano family. He's a PO. Like no one's ever seen this stuff. Like I'm big into the mafia history and whatever and all that. And I heard about New York City, right? That's where that famous mafia comes from with the John Gotti, the Castellanos and all that. Look at that. There's a Castellano that is in the NYPD. I heard somebody say that too when I was down in Florida. They said that a lot of the Italians and all that are police and military now. And all that. Like, and as you can see there's a key one. Castellano is NYPD now. That's a really famous name. Wasn't it Frank Castellano or something like that? Oh, he was a United States Navy officer. Francis Xavier Castellano. They're related to my friend Matt, who's U.S. Marines, Matthew Earles. And they're real. I remember when I tested them, because I was originally I was French mob or whatever, but I went down to Florida and I transitioned into Italian. But I'm still French, but I ended up being more Italian than I was French, because, I don't know, I like the Italian food, and I met all the Italians down there where there wasn't much French, eh? Well, we have French up in Montreal and all that. So I happen to be French, but I got to go down to Florida where people from New York, they go down to Florida. They have family down there in Florida because they live down in Florida. Some of them are retired down in Florida. So that's when I got mixed in with all these like United States Italians and all that. But then I got to know we got an Italian family here in Canada too. It's not as big but it's all one family but I think the heart of it is in New York City. The heart of that Italian family. They originally the story is that they came in off boats. Originally. and they started in the city. No, the city had already been a city at that point, New York City, and it was already started, and then yeah, and they worked their way up. There isn't as many though. There's other people too. There's that Tompkinsville. Kinsella is the commanding officer of the 120th precinct. There's a lot of different precincts in this New York City. That's just one of them. I've never been to New York City, but I've been to Toronto, but it's not nearly as big as this New York City. I think the downtown in New York City is what really is above and beyond, and then you have all your separate boroughs or whatever they call them. You have Staten Island or what have you, and then you've got Brooklyn, right? And you got a couple different ones actually, and that downtown's really big. You have the Empire State Building. That's a famous one. In Toronto, we got the CN Tower. That's one. But then we have other skyscrapers too. So I guess, well, the Empire State Building, I guess now would be equivalent to the CN Tower. They used to have the Twin Towers, which was two big business buildings, where now they just have that, what's called the Remembrance area. And it was a real thing that happened over there in New York City. Wow, look at this angle of New York City. Wow. I've never had the privilege. I mean, so I can only talk from a perspective that he never got blessed with the privilege of being able to see or be in New York City. So that's the only perspective in which I can talk from. I remember seeing on the news when that plane landed in the Hudson's River or whatever and saved the day. The pilot saved the day, and he landed it in the Hudson because it was going to, right in the middle of New York City, a big airliner. It reminds me a lot of Toronto, but a little bit bigger. Much like a Toronto, but there's a lot more buildings, it looks like. Toronto's got buildings, though, just like this, though. Toronto's got buildings just like that. But here's the thing. Toronto's not connected to as many other states and cities as New York. They cross the bridge, go to Jersey. Then there's Pennsylvania. Go over to Philly. Then, hey, guess what? There's people in Philly that are from Chicago. You got fucking ones over there. You could go down to Florida, Georgia. Oh, there's Gucci Mane LaFleur. You know what I mean? There's just, everybody's connected. You can hit a lick in New York and go over to Cali. It's a whole different map. It's way different. Toronto, you got like a couple choices. You're going to go up to maybe Montreal. You're going to go to London. Or you're going to go to... Maybe you could go out west. There's only one highway to go out to Edmonton or Calgary or Vancouver. So you got some bigger cities out west, but there's only one highway. Everybody knows where to get you at. You're going to be on Canada Highway. Whereas it's a whole different ballgame out in the U.S. There's so many different highways. The way people conduct business, it ain't fucking... You don't know what highway they're on, where they're going, what state they're connected to. Yeah, you don't know what states they're connected to. And then there's some people that they're Americans and they use that as an advantage. They don't know anybody else. They're from the state of Tennessee. They don't know anybody else, and they pretend they do until they make their way up or whatever. You got ones that are interstate. They have families all over so you got to watch that, the families. The United States is a big place. I would know. I used to live there for 7 years. So I carry some of the United States values. But I wish I would have got to go to that New York City. But nowadays, when I know how it is in real life, It's a lot of work going through in New York City. This is the sky. This is the sky view. When you actually go to New York City, when you get off that plane, you're going to be in the streets of New York City, and it's on an individual person basis, just like everywhere else, sort of thing. And that's the huge city that you got to roam through. And there's a lot of people there. I got to see Detroit from in my with my real eyes, North Detroit. So I get the idea a little bit now from the ground. I mean, look at how big this river thing is going through. It's a lot bigger than the Detroit River. You got the flags, the bridges. They have all these. It matches my firearm. I have a firearm that I had to got imported from the United States. Wow, the United States. I used to watch that ball drop every year on the TV. If you're in the air, oh, but I remember when I was in Florida, it's the big dream that one day you're going to get old and be able to go up to New York City. And then you realize, oh, only the special ones get to go. Or maybe you were a special one and you go. When usually I think you only go one time. It gets cold. Some people go 2 years in a row or yeah. But not everybody gets to go to that. I watched it a few times. Doesn't matter if you're a United States citizen or not. You got to have the money. You got to have the money to go. Peas and pickles. See, it's up north. That's kind of how we do it up here, peas and pickles. Right, but they have those. This is that Central Park, I believe. Is it? I'm not sure. That might not be Central Park, but it might be. I'm not sure. I used to watch all the very expensive condominium showings on the internet, showing the multi-million-dollar condominiums in New York City. Very expensive as it is to live in New York to have any sort of. We love watching it from a distance and the Macy's parade and everything. They got money in New York. They had money. It's a whole different world to what, Tom. If you want to live well in New York, all I know is I'm not one capable of living a well life in New York, but man, some people do. Look at this picture here in New York. It's only something I can look up to. Wow, this reminds me a lot of like a Toronto. But this isn't Toronto, this is New York. New York City. Just south in the state of New York. South a couple hundred miles. This building reminds me a lot of our buildings over in Alberta. We have a few of those buildings in Banff. Same with up in our parliamentary province in Ottawa. We have those. And in Toronto and in London and many other, but nothing beats, look at this, New York. Wow, there's a lot of millions. They have millions in New York though too. A lot of video games have been based off of New York City. Mafia, the Grand Theft Autos, and all that. Look at this. It looks a lot like a Toronto, but it's New York City, the city that I haven't been to. Look at this. We have one of these buildings in Toronto too. I think that's what it was at one time when they were building the cities. They used to look at each other and say, "Oh, New York's got this building. Toronto's getting that one. So put up this one. Put up that one." New York, London. Old New York. Because there's also an old Toronto, but this New York reminds me of a New York probably about in the, probably I'd say probably 1990s or something. 1980, 1990 New York.